I knew every hum, click, and stutter of the machines better than my own heartbeat. That morning, they all sounded normal, except the humans didn't. My name is Colin Barrett. I'd spent nearly 2 decades inside that factory, and I could tell something was off before a single word was spoken. The air on the production floor was tighter than usual. No alarms, no blinking error codes, no mechanical jams, just a quiet, clinical anticipation that hung in the space like static. I'd seen that kind of silence before. It never meant anything good. I stood in my usual spot by the diagnostics panel, sipping lukewarm coffee from the ceramic mug my daughter had painted for me in elementary school. When Dad was still legible, though the paint had chipped around the rim. 18 years with the same company, and this mug had survived every plant upgrade, every factory reshuffle. It was the one constant. The morning huddle was held near Bay 3, in the middle of the factory floor. The usual circle of 35 operators, technicians, and shift leads gathered around the yellow line taped to the concrete. Leon gave me a quick nod as he joined the group, subtle, almost hesitant. Even that felt off. Then came the click of heels. Madeline Groves appeared in a sharp navy suit that looked straight out of a downtown Toronto boardroom. Hair pinned, tablet in hand, voice clear but distant. She was only 3 months into her new role as plant manager, transferred in from corporate. Polished, efficient, cold. We're modernizing operations, she announced, eyes scanning the crowd but never settling on mine. Some positions will become redundant as we optimize workflows. They didn't revoke my access. Not fully. That was their first mistake. The week after Madeline's announcement, things started shifting fast but quietly. My keycard still opened the server room. My desktop still booted into the firmware dashboard. But when I logged into the main control terminal, half of the menus were grayed out. I could see the status of the machines. I just couldn't change anything. I knew exactly what that meant. No formal demotion, no pink slip, just a silent erasure of responsibility. They were making space around me, not because I'd failed, but because I no longer fit their idea of what modern looked like. That's how companies do it now. No confrontation, just limits and silence. When I asked the IT lead about the locked features, he offered a nervous smile and a vague line about new permissions protocols under review. I didn't push. That would have given them a headline. Instead, I went back to my station and plugged in an external drive. I started backing up everything: calibration logs, firmware scripts, diagnostic macros, 17 years of custom code written in my own shorthand. I copied it all onto my personal laptop, encrypted and timestamped, not company property. Intellectual work I had built outside formal documentation. They had the machines. I had the brain that made them run. Leon caught up with me by the lockers at the end of the shift. He leaned against the wall like he always did when something was bothering him. Madeline's got Nexora people walking around asking the floor techs weird questions, he muttered, trying to map systems they don't understand. I nodded. They're prepping for the cutover. You think it's happening that fast? They've already started. I'm just the part they haven't deleted yet. Leon scratched the back of his neck, clearly uneasy. Politics, man. She wants a clean slate, a resume bullet. Just keep your head down. I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. That's the plan. That night, I sat at my home office, the room where I used to help my daughter with her math homework. Now the desk held 2 monitors, a half-finished schematic of the Southwest conveyor drive system on one screen, and my encrypted backup drive on the other. I labeled the folder, just in case. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. There was no angry resignation letter, no confrontation in a conference room, just quiet steps backward away from the machine I'd built piece by piece, algorithm by algorithm. The next day, Nexora technicians in branded vests started appearing near the mainline hubs. They asked questions like, where's the back-end fault log kept? Or does this I/O board support automatic drift correction? No one could answer, not because we were untrained, but because all that had lived in my head. I saw one of them take a photo of a control panel I'd hand-wired 7 years ago. It had no labels, no manual, just an output that worked every time. That panel ran 3 machines in perfect sync. Later that afternoon, I returned to it alone. I opened the access cover, adjusted the dial 1 notch off center, then closed it again. The machine still worked, but with a half-second delay, barely noticeable unless you knew what to look for. A harmless drift, a breadcrumb. I walked out of the factory 15 minutes late that day. No one stopped me. No one looked up. The place already assumed I was gone. If they wanted a factory without me, I was going to give them exactly that. 6 weeks of silence. Then my phone rang. It was her. I let it buzz twice before picking up. "Colin Barrett," I said, as if I didn't recognize the number. "Colin, this is Madeline Groves from Velwyn Technologies." Her voice wasn't quite as crisp as I remembered. Less steel, more static. "I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." That was rich. She'd caught me at my worst 6 weeks ago. "I've got a few minutes," I replied evenly. "We're experiencing some technical difficulties with the Southwest conveyor line. Unexpected stoppages, unexplained error codes. It's affecting production. And Nexora's having trouble diagnosing the root cause." There it was, the ghost of my warning come to life. I told maintenance that drive controller needed a firmware refresh before winter. No one listened. Now it was November, and the old panel I deliberately misaligned was finally starting to show its teeth. I leaned back in my chair. "Have they consulted the system documentation?" A pause. "There isn't any." "Right. I was wondering," she continued, "if you might be open to assisting, just a quick consultation to get us through this." I let the silence breathe. "I'm available," I said finally, "at a consulting rate of $300 per hour, 4-hour minimum, payable in advance. I'll also need a signed contract outlining the scope of work. That's more than double your previous hourly rate," she said, clearly surprised. "That's my consulting rate." I replied, "Take it or leave it." Another pause. I imagined her weighing damage control against pride. It wasn't a long pause. "I'll get approval and call you back." She called back within the hour. They agreed to my terms. The next morning, I pulled into the Velwyn parking lot as a visitor. The security guard handed me a badge with a red stripe across the top. Temporary access. It felt theatrical. I signed in, nodded at a few familiar faces, none of whom looked me in the eye, and was led to the line where the Southwest conveyor sat idle. Nexora techs stood around it like surgeons baffled by an alien body. Leon spotted me, and his face lit up with cautious relief. "Thank God you're here," he whispered as I passed. I knelt beside the control panel, popped it open, and pretended to scroll through logs while I checked the dial I'd offset. Just a half-second lag enough to throw the load-balancing algorithm into chaos. Then I reached for my laptop, connected it to the system, and opened the calibration file I'd written years ago. They watched in silence as I typed. 30 minutes later, the conveyor hummed back to life like nothing had ever been wrong. Madeline hovered nearby. "Thank you. Colin, I don't know what we would have done without you." "Happy to help," I said, snapping my laptop closed. She hesitated. "Actually, we've had similar issues with the CNC machines in Bay 3. Tolerances are drifting, and Nexora hasn't found the cause. Since you're already here, that wasn't included in today's scope," I said, checking my watch. "If you want me to look at that, you'll need a new contract." Her face tightened. "Colin, be reasonable." "I am being reasonable," I replied calmly. "I'm treating this as the business arrangement you made it when you eliminated my position." I packed my gear slowly, deliberately. As I walked toward the exit, Leon caught up with me. "It's not just the CNC," he said quietly. "Everything's starting to fall apart. Quality control's catching more defects every day. Customer returns are up, way up." I didn't say anything. "They're in way over their heads, aren't they?" he asked. I met his eyes. I didn't have to see it coming. "Leon, I built these systems. I know exactly what happens when they're not maintained properly." Leon glanced toward the factory floor, then back at me. "And you're going to make them pay for it." It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. "They already are. They didn't just need my help. They needed me to rebuild what they tried to erase." 2 days after I walked off the factory floor, my phone rang again. This time it wasn't Madeline. It was Andrew Cho, Vice President of Operations at Nexitrans Logistics, the parent company that owned Velwyn. "Mr. Barrett," he said, voice smooth but clipped, "we'd like to discuss a more comprehensive engagement. We're seeing production variances and quality issues not just at your former site, but at 2 others. Your name keeps coming up." I didn't respond immediately. I wanted the weight of that silence to land. "We propose a 6-month contract," he continued, full-time consulting to restore operations. If possible, document the systems for future teams. So now they wanted documentation. I'll consider it, I replied, but I won't be returning as an employee. Of course, he said. This would be a professional services agreement. Name your terms. I already had. That night, I sat in my home office, the same one I'd used to store 17 years of system logs, diagnostic models, and calibration sequences. But I wasn't just dusting off old files. I was building something new, something better. I called it VelTTech, short for Velwin Technical Architecture. It was a full-spectrum monitoring and control system, machine diagnostics, calibration alerts, predictive maintenance, quality tracking, all on a real-time dashboard, and built around one thing they'd never had before: transparency. If they'd had this system 6 months ago, they would have known the conveyor was drifting before it shut down. They would have seen the CNC tolerances slipping before the parts failed inspection, but they didn't, because they never asked how the old systems worked, only how to replace them. VelTTech would change that. A week later, I walked into a boardroom at Nexitrans headquarters in Mississauga. Glass walls, leather chairs, bottled water lined up with corporate symmetry. Andrew Cho sat at the far end, flanked by two executives I didn't recognize. Their smiles were tight, their eyes tired. The immediate crisis appears to be resolved. Andrew began, nodding toward the documents I'd submitted. But it's clear we have a deeper issue. I connected my laptop to the projector and pulled up a graph, 3 lines climbing steeply. Defect rates, warranty claims, lost production hours. This is what happens, I said, when you eliminate institutional knowledge and replace it with marketing language. No one interrupted. I advanced to the next slide. VelTTech, clean layout, clear metrics, everything visible, every variance, every anomaly, every piece of performance data. This is what I'm proposing, I said. A full integration system built around the equipment you already use, but with real oversight. One of the executives leaned forward. How long would implementation take? 3 months, I said. The core is already done. And who would maintain it afterward? That was the moment I'd been waiting for. I would, under a long-term consulting agreement, on-site 2 days per week. VelTTech remains my intellectual property. Nexitrans licenses it with full support and updates. The room went silent. Then Andrew asked the question that mattered. What's the total cost? I brought up the final slide. The last 3 months have cost you over $3,400,000 in failed parts, overtime, returns, and lost clients. My proposal, $470,000 per year. He studied the number, then looked at me. You've put a lot of thought into this. I've had time, I replied. And motivation? Another silence. This one heavier. I'll need to take this to the board, he said. But I think you've made a compelling case. I packed my laptop and stood. Outside the meeting room, Leon was waiting. He fell into step beside me as we walked toward the elevators. How did it go? He asked. We'll see, I said. Either they value what I'm offering or they don't. Leon smirked. After the beating they just took, they'll value it? I stopped at the elevator doors and turned to him. By the way, I'll need a shop floor manager for Lead Tech Systems, someone who knows these machines. And these people, interested. He blinked, caught off guard. Then his expression shifted into a slow, quiet smile. You serious? Dead serious, I said. I was done building other people's empires. It was time to build my own. The system wasn't the only thing corrupted. So was the plan to replace me. 2 weeks into my contract, I was running diagnostics on the central control server when I found a file that shouldn't have been there. Buried deep in a mislabeled folder, Strategic Ops Q2's final was a presentation slide deck authored by none other than Madeline Groves. The title page read, Operational Efficiency Proposal. Cost reduction through legacy elimination. I clicked through. Slide after slide detailed how replacing me with Nexora Labs would save the company over $200,000 annually. It projected a temporary increase in defect rates, noted at 3 to 5% as an acceptable loss. She'd run the numbers. She'd quantified the fallout, and she'd sold it to executives who'd never stepped foot on the factory floor. But it didn't stop there. Tucked at the end was a line that didn't make sense, at least. Not right away. Ongoing external advisory fees to be absorbed under Nexora budget. The attached invoice listed recurring payments to a consultancy named Groves and Vale Strategic Insights. My chest went still. I checked the dates. The payments began the same month she joined Velwyn. She hadn't just forced me out to look efficient. She'd been getting paid by Nexora to ensure their integration had no resistance from inside. It wasn't strategy. It was self-dealing. I printed the slide deck, locked the file into a secure folder, and forwarded it to Andrew Cho with one line in the subject: conflict of interest, immediate attention required. That afternoon, a meeting was called with senior leadership. I wasn't invited, but I didn't need to be. By the end of the day, Madeline's company badge was deactivated. The next morning, Andrew called me into a side room on the executive floor. No small talk, just straight facts. She's been terminated. With cause. I didn't ask for details. I didn't need to. She was also receiving undisclosed compensation from Nexora. He added, that violates multiple internal policies. We've opened a formal audit. I gave a quiet nod. It wasn't satisfaction I felt. It was confirmation of everything I'd suspected, but couldn't prove until now. Later that evening, Leon and I walked through the factory. He'd officially accepted the role as Litech's on-site systems manager. We were inspecting the Veltitech installation's new sensors, dashboards, the live defect tracking interface now displayed on wall-mounted monitors. You really think this will stop it from happening again? Leon asked, eyes scanning the clean, data-rich readouts. Not stop, I said, but expose? That was always the issue. When you hide what matters, you can excuse anything. A few days later, I was invited back to Nexatrans HQ for a follow-up meeting, this time with Andrew and a new face, Patricia Winters, the incoming chief operating officer. She had the calm poise of someone who didn't waste words. We've instituted new internal protocols, Patricia said, placing a folder in front of me. All cost-cutting initiatives now require quality impact assessments. Any system transition must include full knowledge, transfer, and continuity planning. She paused. We're calling it the Lee Protocol. I looked down at the folder. It was neat, organized, and branded. Inside was a copy of my Veltech schema, now integrated into Nexatrans corporate policy. I closed the folder slowly. You built a safety net, she said, and proved it works. Not just for the machines, for the people. 2. Leon joined us halfway through the tour that followed, guiding Patricia through the floor as if it were a living blueprint. Operators waved. Machines ran cleanly, quietly. No more guesswork. No more gambling. Before she left, Patricia turned to me. By the way, she said, we also discovered Madeline had been deleting internal maintenance reports to support her proposal. It's all in the audit log. I didn't smile. I just said, I see. And I meant it, not just the facts. The whole arc, from silence to betrayal to consequence. Because now, finally, the system worked both ways. 1 year after they let me go, I now licensed their future. The autumn sun poured through the tall windows of our new office in downtown Kitchener, casting soft gold across the glass-topped desks and quiet hum of servers lining the back wall. The trees along the Grand River had just started turning, leaves drifting in red and amber. A good sign, I thought. Cycles, change, renewal. 12 people worked here now, engineers, systems analysts, technical support. Litech Systems had grown faster than I expected, faster than I'd even dared hope. But when you build something no one else can replicate, growth has a way of following you. That morning, I stood in our observation room overlooking a real-time dashboard of the Veltitech system, deployed across all 6 Nexatrans manufacturing sites. Each machine streamed live performance data, uptime, defect alerts, calibration drift. Metrics glowed green. There hadn't been a single major system failure in nearly 5 months. Andrew Cho stood beside me, hands in his pockets, expression unreadable. With him was a new executive. Patricia Winters had brought her in from Vancouver. Her name was Evelyn Carver, and she'd been recently appointed to oversee digital transformation across all North American sites. Impressive, Evelyn said, nodding at the wall of metrics. Andrew tells me Veltitech didn't just fix the problem. It gave us a new standard. It didn't fix anything on its own. I said, it just made visible what was already happening. Andrew shifted. After what happened in Pittsburgh, he said, we're expanding Veltitech to our entire logistics division. Turns out they tried a similar modernization there without your system. The results were familiar. I raised an eyebrow. You caught it in time. Barely, he admitted. But thanks to your early alert thresholds, we stopped production before the losses got out of hand. I nodded. I didn't need praise. I just needed to know they finally understood the stakes. There's something else you should know. Patricia had told me during a call last week, Madeline Groves has been terminated, not just transferred. She was also receiving kickbacks from Nexora Labs. We have proof now. So that was it. The last piece. I didn't feel triumphant, just resolved. Justice hadn't been loud, but it had arrived. Quietly, like all good systems do. Across the room, my phone buzzed. A message from Leon. Bay 4 upgrade complete. All systems green. Simple, efficient, reliable. Like Leon himself, he'd become my right hand, managing on-site implementations across all client factories while I focused on long-term design. It wasn't just a partnership, it was loyalty, earned through years of shared silence and knowing glances when the world started turning upside down. On my desk sat a framed photo from last spring, my daughter in her graduation gown, beaming in front of a Waterloo engineering banner. She'd just accepted a job at a robotics firm in Ottawa. At her graduation dinner, she raised a glass and said, "Dad, you didn't just take lemons and make lemonade. You took lemons and built a lemonade empire." That moment stayed with me. The office door opened gently. My assistant leaned in. "Your 10 o'clock is here." The Velwin family. Harold Velwin, long retired, had reached out 2 weeks ago. He wanted to buy back his old company from Nexatrans, wanted advice on how to modernize the right way, without gutting what made the place special. I adjusted my tie and headed for the conference room. This time, I wasn't walking in as someone desperate to prove his worth. I wasn't an employee. I wasn't replaceable. I was someone they called now, someone essential. Sometimes the best revenge isn't burning the bridge. It's building one they can't cross without you. There's a particular kind of silence that comes after being discarded, after giving your best years to something, only to be treated like a replaceable part. I've lived through that silence, and I've also lived through the moment it broke, when the very people who pushed me aside had to call me back. But my story isn't unique. It's just one of countless stories unfolding in offices, factories, and boardrooms every single day where quiet loyalty is ignored, where shortcuts are rewarded, and where people forget that knowledge, once dismissed, can choose not to return. If you're going through something similar, if you're feeling replaced, undervalued, or written off, remember this. Revenge doesn't always look like rage. Sometimes the most powerful response is calm, strategic, unshakable. Let your results speak when your voice isn't welcome. Thank you for watching and listening. Stories like this matter not just because they're satisfying, but because they remind us we're not alone. If this resonated with you, leave a 1 in the comments. Subscribe if you want to hear more true stories like this. And if you have a story of your own, share it. You never know who might need to hear it today.